Out here on Radio Row in New Orleans, Kevin Walsh with Jason Fitz of Yahoo Sports and NFL Analyst over there. We're out here getting ready for Eagles-Chiefs. We've seen the game before 2 years ago in the Super Bowl. They played the year following, actually, at Arrowhead. Both teams were off of a bye. The Eagles win that game. I don't think calling it 1-1 is fair, though, because winning the Super Bowl matters a lot more. I'm curious, when you started to get into this game here, the Chiefs favored in the matchup, how much did you look back at the performances from the two teams in the first Super Bowl meeting that we saw 2 years ago?
Very little, honestly, because if you're looking at the Eagles, I mean, you're talking about a complete transformation, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. Like, it's a different team. So what's difficult here is that as much as we want to look at, hey, Philly was up in that game at the half and they had every opportunity to win, I don't know how that plays into this situation, if we're being honest. And that's one of the hardest things. Like, all of us that love sports or cover sports spend so much time talking about the history of matchups. And the history really is so meaningless to what's actually going to happen in this game. The history that I look at that matters to in this game is look at Andy Reid and his record off of bye weeks. Look at the success that Steve Spagnuolo, their defensive coordinator, has had in the NFL playoffs. Those are the things that I think, those are palpable stats and information that you can take with you moving forward. But the matchup before, I think Philly is just a wildly different football team, and they didn't have Saquon then either.
Yeah, they absolutely are. I think on both sides of the ball, I could argue maybe more even defensively, because the defense going into the game 2 years ago was led by a great sack unit. Everyone knew the secondary was vulnerable. The line couldn't get there for the reasons that they couldn't get there. Mahomes lit them up. I'm fascinated to see, and I'm curious what you're expecting out of Pat specifically in the game, going up against what I think is pretty confidently the best defense in the National Football League.
Yeah, you're 1,000% right. And by the way, home run of an offseason to be able to get Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, two guys that I've been lucky enough to cover the draft at this point for the last 8 years, and they were both can't miss prospects that somehow were still sitting there. It's the way the board falls sometimes. You're right. I think what's going to have to happen here, though, is Mahomes is going to have to get the ball out of his hands incredibly quickly, which he's been doing anyway. But especially when you apply the pressure up the middle that we expect that they will be able to apply. Joe Thuney moving out to tackle has helped solidify the offensive line for the Chiefs, but I would argue that makes them vulnerable right up the center, and we all know if you can get to a quarterback up the gut. So I'd expect that Andy Reid's going to be moving the pocket around a lot of it, trying to find ways to get Mahomes moving a little bit, and then he's going to have to get rid of the ball in lightning speed over and over in it.
And you pair that, the rush attack has really struggled, though I found their ability to run the football in the red area against Buffalo to be the complete difference in that game, where quarterback runs from Mahomes that they never call. Kareem Hunt had a big run early on. I do think that is one of the maybe fascinating swings of this game, is if Kansas City can run it with some effectiveness, stay balanced and on time, I wonder if that presents some challenges that Philly maybe isn't necessarily prepping for.
Yeah, and look, the Chiefs aren't a great run team, but they're an efficient run team.
Yeah.
When they need to be able to run the ball, they do. And that's an interesting element in this game, because the aggressiveness of the Eagles' defense is something that Kansas City is going to try and take advantage of. So even if it's not flat out normal, line up, like we have this concept of what the run game looks like based on what it looked like 20 years ago. Now there's so many creative ways to run. I would expect also a lot of jet sweep sort of stuff, like how can they try and keep movement and motion and try and just slow down the interior of that defensive line for Philly, at least for a second, to see if they can get some space.
On the other side of it, I think one of the fascinating things that we've kind of heard throughout a Philly season, and certainly in the postseason, is, well, they're not going to let Saquon beat him. And I would think people would stop saying that, going off of what's been happening. All the respect for Spags. He's been amazing. But I do find it interesting that there are some, and I'm wondering who are like, well, Spags isn't going to let Saquon beat him. These DCs are not letting Saquon do anything. I think Dan Quinn's a very good defensive coordinator. Maybe doesn't have the pieces that Spags has, but the Eagles' rush offense as a whole is a completely different animal.
That's a really important point that you're making, and I would just say that you and I could decide that we want to roll the basketball out and take on LeBron. And when we walk out on the court, we're going to say, you know what? Not going to let LeBron dunk on us today. That's not going to keep LeBron from dunking. Yeah. I don't think you can slow. Like I fully expect the Saquon's going to be able to get 120 plus yards in this game, and that's just who he is. And then the other part of it is people keep talking about the explosive runs. Understand that when they start run blitzing to try and slow down Saquon, which is the method adjusted to it. Well, now you've got a great offensive line, and all they have to do is seal that one block off, and now all of a sudden nobody's in position to stop him. Saquon's gone. So it's a monster nightmare to just say we won't let him beat it. It just doesn't work that way.
We're here on Radio Row with Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports inside coverage, right?
Yes, inside coverage, Yahoo Sports.
As we're getting to button up here, do you in this moment feel that you have your pick settled for this game, who you actually think wins it?
Yeah, because even though it's not logical, I always go back to this number. There have been 7 times in Patrick Mahomes' career in the playoffs or Super Bowl that he's had the ball in his hands with under 4 minutes to go in the game, needing a score to tie or win. 7 times. For example, Brady had 11 times. 5 of those times he got the score. Drew Brees had 6 times in his career. 3 of those times he got the score. The league average is about 40. 7 times Mahomes has had the ball in that situation. All 7 times he got the score. And the problem is the only way you beat the Philadelphia Eagles is if you are up by more than 2 scores. Even though beat the Chiefs.
Yep.
Even though I believe the Eagles are a better team and it's a matchup nightmare, I can't get those numbers out of my head. I think Kansas City wins the game, and all of us are trying to figure out why, because that's just who they've become.
It is. I think what's so interesting to me is, can that Eagles defense for 60 minutes present enough challenges where the offense can extend? Because I think the Buffalo defense was not at this level, and all of a sudden Pat looked as smooth as he did. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch play out, a lot of fun talking ball with you.
Always, my friend. I appreciate you.
Yep, make sure Yahoo Sports, Jason Fitz, covering the National Football League.